This credential lapsed a decade ago. Is this your retirement pass, old-timer? The security officer chuckled as he displayed the weathered military identification. The elderly gentleman remained silent, simply observing without response. But when he made a single hushed phone call from the distant bench, everything transformed because the number he pressed didn't connect to a local contact. It connected to a secure line at the Pentagon. And suddenly, those who had ridiculed him discovered that while some credentials might expire on paper, the authority they represent never fades. Certain respect isn't petitioned, it's remembered. Respect for the legends we overlook until they remind us who they are. Mondays at the Lakeside Municipal DMV followed an unchanging pattern. A crowd of restless individuals, overhead fluorescents pulsing like anxious guards. The steady electronic tone announcing each sequential number. Today proved identical. A 127, Station 4. Next visitor, please. The atmosphere was heavy with shared irritation. Mothers struggled with fidgety toddlers. Young adults endlessly browsed social media. Employees watched time pass, tallying minutes stolen from precious lunch breaks. In the distant corner, an aging gentleman approached Station 4 with deliberate movements. Unlike the disheveled masses, he stood distinctive. Gray hair precisely groomed, dark blue jacket meticulously pressed without a speck, beige trousers with immaculate pleats. His bearing remained distinctly military despite the slight quiver in his left hand, evidence of something casual observers couldn't comprehend. "Good morning," he said, voice soft yet distinct. "I need to renew my credentials, please." Jennifer Morgan, 5 months into her DMV position and already desensitized by repetition, barely lifted her eyes. "License or identification card?" "Neither." He extended a weathered palm, placing something on the counter between them. Jennifer glanced downward, anticipating the standard driver's permit. Instead, she observed a military identification, unlike any she'd ever processed. Faded azure, unusual markings, security features she couldn't identify. "Sir, this expired in 2012, she remarked, voice tinged with the practiced weariness of someone who'd explained fundamental procedures countless times. "I'm aware," he responded evenly. "I'm here to renew it." Jennifer frowned, fingers hovering above her keyboard. Procedures for expired military credentials existed, but this example matched no template from her training. She raised her arm, signaling her manager. "Issue?" Manuel Rodriguez asked, leaning past her shoulder. "Unusual military identification expired 10 years ago." Manuel examined the card with increasing doubt. He gestured toward Officer James Wilson, the uniformed security personnel stationed nearby. "Everything all right?" Wilson asked, approaching the station with casual authority. At 28, with 3 years on the security detail, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who enjoyed the minor influence his position provided. "This gentleman wants to renew a military credential," Manuel explained, handing the card to Wilson. Officer Wilson turned the ID between his fingers, amusement spreading across his features. "Is this some joke?" he asked, grinning. "Looks like something from a toy store." "This credential lapsed a decade ago. Is this your retirement pass, old-timer?" The elderly man didn't laugh, didn't flinch. "It's authentic, and I'd like it renewed." "Sure, Pops, and I'm Captain America," Wilson snickered, displaying the card to another staff member who smirked accordingly. "Look at this thing. Probably printed it at home." He returned the ID dismissively. "Try Veterans Affairs or something. This isn't even standard military identification." The elderly man accepted his card without comment, tucked it carefully into an interior pocket, and stepped aside. No argument, no objection, simply a slight nod before moving to a bench against the far wall. There he remained perfectly motionless, removed a basic flip phone from his jacket, and unfolded a small paper containing a single handwritten sequence. No area code, no identifier beside it, just 12 digits that remained unchanged for 3 decades. The elderly man dialed methodically, each number pressed with deliberate accuracy. The line rang once before connecting with a gentle click. "Pentagon switchboard authentication code." The female voice was precise, professional, without any distinguishing regional inflection. He recited 6 numbers followed by 4 letters, calm, exact, without hesitation. The operator didn't request his name, didn't ask for verification. She simply replied, "Transferring, please hold." A series of clicks followed, then silence. He closed the device and returned it to his pocket, his expression unchanged as he settled back against the hard plastic seat to wait. At Station 4, activities continued. Number 128 was summoned. A teenager with massive headphones slouched forward, learner's permit application in hand. Officer Wilson leaned against the counter, still entertained by the previous interaction. "You see that old guy's card?" he asked Jennifer, voice projected just loudly enough to carry. "Probably forged it for senior discounts or something." A few individuals in the nearby line chuckled uncomfortably. An older woman glanced toward the bench and then quickly away. Jennifer smiled thinly, unlocking her phone during the brief lull. She opened Reddit, fingers already composing a post for entitled people. Elderly man tries to use expired military ID at DMV. Obviously fake, probably printed at home. The security guard totally shut him down. She attached a blurry partial image of the ID she'd surreptitiously captured, careful to keep the man's face excluded to avoid complications. 5 minutes elapsed. 10. The elderly man remained motionless, observing the proceedings with quiet detachment. Then a call came through, not to the public line that rang constantly throughout the day, but to the administrative line in the private office, rarely utilized, unlisted. Margaret Simmons, regional supervisor for the Department of Motor Vehicles, answered on the second ring. The conversation lasted exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Not a single employee heard her portion of the exchange, but they all witnessed what followed. Margaret emerged from her office with steps so brisk they nearly qualified as running. Her typically composed expression had flushed to a deep crimson that spread down her neck and disappeared beneath her blouse. She didn't look at the elderly man on the bench, didn't acknowledge the waiting customers. She walked directly to security, finger pointed squarely at Officer Wilson. "You!" she snapped. "And you," turning to Jennifer. "My office now." The abruptness silenced the entire lobby. Even the electronic tone seemed to pause momentarily, as if sensing the atmospheric shift. As Wilson and Jennifer followed their superior through the secured entrance, a black SUV with government plates stopped outside the main doors. 2 men in identical dark suits emerged, adjusting earpieces as they surveyed the building. The senior agent, silver-haired and expressionless, entered first. He scanned the waiting area with practiced efficiency until his gaze settled on the elderly man, still seated patiently on the bench. "Colonel Hayes, sir," he said, approaching with subtle deference. "We received your request for assistance." The elderly man, Colonel Hayes, looked up with the faintest hint of surprise. "Didn't make one," he replied, voice low but caring in the now silent room. "Just reminded someone I'm still breathing." The second agent positioned himself near the entrance, hand casually touching the bulge beneath his jacket as he monitored the space. On the opposite side of the security door, raised voices penetrated the thin walls. Words like classified and authorization and security clearance filtered into the lobby. The door swung open again. Officer Wilson emerged, face drained of color, eyes fixed firmly on the floor. No smirk, no authority, just the stiff movements of someone navigating unfamiliar territory. "Sir," he began, approaching Colonel Hayes, "I didn't realize—" "No," Colonel Hayes replied evenly. "You didn't." The waiting room had transformed from bureaucratic monotony to breathless theater. Conversation ceased, phones lowered. Eyes tracked every movement between the suited agents and the elderly man they addressed with unmistakable respect. The senior agent produced a leather portfolio and extracted a folder stamped with recognizable federal markings. "We brought everything you'll need, Colonel," he said, offering the documents. "Fast-track renewal authorization, official apology from the Department of Defense liaison, and escort orders for immediate processing." Colonel William Hayes accepted the folder with a slight nod, but made no move to open it. 37 years of classified operations had taught him that documents were often the least important aspect of any interaction. The security door opened again. This time, Margaret Simmons herself emerged, followed by a visibly shaken Jennifer. The regional director's professional composure had returned, though her complexion remained unnaturally flushed. "Colonel Hayes," she said, voice pitched slightly higher than normal. "If you'll accompany me, we can process your renewal immediately. I've cleared my personal office for privacy." "No." The colonel's response was simple, definitive. "I'll wait my turn." Margaret blinked, momentarily disoriented. "Sir, after what happened—" "What happened?" Colonel Hayes interrupted gently. "Was a misunderstanding. I've experienced worse." A single dry chuckle escaped him, the first emotion he'd displayed since entering the building. Those nearest might have glimpsed something in his eyes then. Not anger, something deeper. Memories of places where misunderstandings had consequences measured in blood rather than embarrassment. "But your schedule, sir," the younger agent pressed. "The Pentagon indicated—" "The Pentagon doesn't dictate my afternoon," Hayes replied. He gestured toward the electronic display overhead. "Number 142 is next. I'm 151. I'll wait." The DMV staff exchanged uncertain glances, but no one dared contradict him. Margaret nodded stiffly and retreated to her office, the agents taking positions near the colonel's bench. Officer Wilson remained frozen, caught in the impossible space between apology and escape. "Sir," he finally managed, voice barely audible, "if I had known who you were—" "You'd have treated me differently," Colonel Hayes finished for him. "That's the problem." For the next 47 minutes, Colonel Hayes waited like any civilian. When 151 finally flashed on the screen, he approached Station 7, not the director's office, and submitted his renewal application to a wide-eyed clerk who processed it with trembling hands. The suited agents remained nearby, their presence transforming the mundane government office into something that felt vaguely classified. Whispers spread, phones discreetly captured images. The story was already forming, though none present knew its true dimensions. As Colonel Hayes prepared to leave, ID properly renewed, he paused beside Officer Wilson, who had maintained his position by the security desk throughout the ordeal. "Officer," he said quietly. Wilson straightened involuntarily. "Yes, sir." Colonel Hayes removed his updated identification card, holding it briefly visible. "Next time you see this badge, stand or step aside." He didn't wait for a response, simply returned the ID to his pocket and walked toward the exit, the agents falling into step beside him. At the door, he turned once more, addressing no one in particular and everyone at once. "That ID you mocked," he said, voice carrying in the hushed room, "was issued at Camp Sheridan in 1984. The signatures on it belong to individuals whose names most history books don't record. Not because they lacked importance, but because they mattered too much to be documented." A young mother clutching renewal forms pulled her phone out, recording the moment. "I carried it through 3 conflicts you never heard about in 7 countries that wouldn't acknowledge I was there. When it expired in 2012, I was operating where American credentials would have been a death warrant." He adjusted his coat with the precise movements of a man accustomed to perfect alignment. "Respect isn't about recognition. It's about remembering that some of the most crucial work is performed by people whose names you'll never know, carrying identification you won't recognize." With that, he exited the building, disappearing into the waiting SUV as quickly and quietly as he had arrived. Behind him, Officer Wilson collapsed into a chair, already knowing his career wouldn't survive the day. At Station 4, Jennifer stared at her phone at the half-written Reddit post still open on her screen. With a shaking finger, she deleted it and closed the application. Some narratives, she realized, weren't hers to share. By sunrise the following morning, Colonel William Hayes had become an unlikely internet phenomenon. The young mother's video had been uploaded, shared, and amplified across social media platforms. Without context, without background, Millions watched a silver-haired man in a simple Navy jacket deliver a lesson in quiet dignity. Pentagon veteran humiliates DMV personnel after ID ridicule, read one headline. They scoffed at his expired ID. Then the Pentagon called, proclaimed another. A cropped photo captured Colonel Hayes departing the building, flanked by the suited agents, his weathered profile half turned toward the camera. Something in his expression, resolute, experienced, unimpressed, resonated across generational and political divides. Veterans' networks exploded with activity. Retired service members recognized elements of the situation that civilians missed entirely. They ridiculed a living legend, wrote a former Marine on a popular forum. The type of ID he described isn't provided to ordinary personnel. Even generals walk carefully around those badges. 30 years in shadows, another commented. 4-star generals wouldn't dare mock him. These are the ghosts who made our visible victories possible. By noon, the Lakeside Municipal DMV released a brief statement announcing personnel changes and procedural reviews following an unfortunate incident. The public recognized corporate damage control when they encountered it. Officer James Wilson submitted his resignation by email, effective immediately. Jennifer Morgan was reassigned to the county archives, a position requiring no public interaction. Margaret Simmons survived professionally, but would spend the next 3 years implementing a comprehensive training program titled Recognizing Classified Clearance Veterans and Respecting What You Don't Understand. Colonel Hayes himself never commented on the incident, never acknowledged the viral video, never sought the spotlight that briefly illuminated decades of shadow service. 3 separate journalists attempted to locate him for interviews. All 3 received the identical response from Pentagon Public Affairs. No comment on the individual in question or the alleged incident. But something changed in that particular DMV branch. Something subtle yet undeniable. The bench where Colonel Hayes had sat remained unmarked. No plaque, no special designation, just an ordinary plastic bench in an ordinary government waiting room. Yet employees noticed that people rarely sat there anymore. When they did, it was with a certain awareness, a certain reverence, as if the space itself had been transformed by brief contact with extraordinary service. The security staff, now under new management, established an unwritten policy. Any military ID, no matter how unusual, received immediate supervisor attention and respectful handling. 6 months later, an elderly woman with trembling hands presented an equally unusual identification card at Station 3. The clerk blinked, recognized something in its format, and immediately requested supervisor assistance. Within minutes, the woman was escorted to a private office for processing, treated with the deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. No one asked questions. No one demanded explanations. Some service doesn't require verification. If Colonel Hayes ever returned to the Lakeside Municipal DMV, no one recognized him. Or perhaps they did and honored his preference for anonymity by looking the other way. But the bench remained and the unspoken rule that came with it. If he appears again, let him proceed first. Because some IDs may expire on paper, but the authority, the sacrifice, the service behind them, these elements become permanent parts of our national memory whether we recognize them or not. Some respect isn't given. It's earned over decades in locations we'll never know, performing duties we'll never fully comprehend. If this story resonated with you, please follow Iron Truth Chronicles, where we believe true identity doesn't expire. It earns its place in history,